Larry's approach to problem solving highlights the use of systems thinking, including both its strong intellectual heritage and its continuing relevance to contemporary challenges. As you will hear, I want to turn it to Larry rather than speak for him, but I'll offer a fun fact for Larry, which is that his family owned the legendary Horseshoe Tavern in Toronto, which was a legendary venue for country music in Canada. There's some things you just have to know to be an Iacocca Fellow, and now you know that as well. Larry, you have a file ready to share, and I think we're ready to go. So carry
Roland,
on.
Roland and Larry, if it's okay, I'll just say a quick word before we dive in.
Yes, I'm sorry. Carry on, Scott. I was out of sequence. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, my welcome and thanks to all for joining. And I wanted to remind us part of the purpose of this activity in addition to keeping the leadership conversation going. And we think that's something that we have to develop routines for and practice. And this is part of a routine and practice. So monthly, last Thursday of every month, we'll continue to do this. And we're grateful to Roland and Mark Spiker for kicking us off in January. This will continue, and as Roland said, we've got a great lineup of speakers, and we invite you all to participate in that. In addition to keeping that leader conversation going, we also want to be sure that we develop a network, or as Mickey and I know from the Thomas Friedman presentation on campus, a couple of nights ago, a complex adaptive coalition of subject matter experts, which is all of you, engaging in conversation in a manner that helps move our learners and our alumni forward in their leadership journeys and conversations. So we'll continue to work together, make sense of things, invite everyone who's an executive fellow to this conversation. And we're now about approaching 50 total executive fellows with the goal in time of having 100 total at any time that we can continue and engage this dialogue. So we welcome you to nominate your colleagues as well. We ask you to put forward articles for conversation as well as your presentations. So thanks to everyone. This is good stuff. And Larry, dear Dr. Starr, off to you. And we
Okay.
look forward to this.
Thanks, Scott. Thanks, Roland. Thanks, everyone. Here's a quick fun fact I have published widely, including a paper called Personality and Chocolate, in which I did with my wife at the time, an evaluation on whether personality has a relationship with chocolate. And we found that it did. It was published in a book. And then I started getting requests from women's magazines to be interviewed because apparently women, personality, and chocolate has special meaning in our society. More about this later. Here's my topic, and it has to do with thinking. I've been interested in this topic for quite a long time. All right. So some years ago, Steve Jobs said, think different. And there's a famous quote by Einstein saying that can't solve the problems we have using the thinking we used that created them. And I have been intrigued by this by a long time. What does it mean to think different? How do you change your thinking exactly? And why would you want to do that? So I have been educated in the premise that there are at least two kinds of thinking modes. One is analytic, and the other is systemic. And analytic is what we'll call the conventional way of thinking. It makes certain assumptions about the nature of how you understand a problem. It has a long and distinguished history of development and evolution. It has famous movies made about it, including the entire Sherlock Holmes concept. It is well known for the processes used by scientists, including Einstein. And it's not only all of these, but my slides stopped again. Oh, it has all kinds of images that are associated with it. This one on the left is a favorite joke of mine. It has metaphors. And most importantly, it is embedded into the Western education curriculum. It is taught at all levels of elementary of high school. It is taught throughout college. It is taught both in the United States and in Canada and in Europe. There are books about how to teach it. It is responsible for the great discoveries of our time. From it emerged evidence-based thinking, evidence-based medicine. It is the basis of the scientific method. How to think analytically. There is a second way to think, however, and it's referred to as systems thinking, or to think systemically. The assumptions are very different. They are, in effect, parallel. In analytic thinking, there's a sense that you can take a problem and break it down into small parts. In fact, the word analysis means break down into small parts. In analysis, you can find a root cause. That's the smallest part. In systemic thinking, the premises are different. You cannot break the problem down into small parts because it will lose its meaning. In systems, you look at the problem as a whole, and in fact, you expand rather than deconstruct the problem. There is no root cause in a system problem. Things are interactive, interdependent, and outcomes sometimes emerge from the interaction of problems when it is a system problem. There are lots of images and jokes about systems thinking. The one on the left, Scott likes. I like the one on the bottom right. Thinking in systems is uncommon. It is rarely taught in elementary and high school. It is occasionally taught as a single course in college. This is both in the United States and in Canada. There are books written about why it is so difficult to learn systems thinking and why it is rarely taught. It is not only rarely taught, but it's rarely applied. There are all kinds of journals and applications of systems thinking. And while its history of real application really goes back a little under 100 years, it's finding a home in many different disciplines, but only very slowly. I've been using it because I was educated in it 20 years ago. But before that, I had almost no knowledge or understanding of it. But since beginning to learn it, and it is a discipline of learning, I've been searching around for as many different disciplinary applications. And I recently found the US AID book, which I presume is probably in its last publication. And I'm just placed in order to see how it's being applied in that particular endeavor. Here's a bridge. There may be different modes of thinking, but so what? So the question is, what are the different kinds of problems that people are confronted with that require different modes of thinking? At least 6 global organizations have asked that question. What are the biggest problems? What are the kinds of problems you have? And it's asked of everyday people, but it's mostly asked of leaders and executives. I'm posting this one because the presentation is easy. Leaders and executives are increasingly defining the types of problems they're having as those related to the context in which the problems are found. They refer to the problems we have are due to the business environment. They're due to the business context. If you're in education, it's the education context. If you're in healthcare, it's the health context. We commonly talk about a global context. Some years ago, the US Army defined context as VUCA, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. More recently, the letter H has been added, hyperconnected. This is connected to what the World Economic Forum has called the fourth industrial revolution. We live in a world now that is not only volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous, but hyper-connected in terms of the digital transformation of information affecting us all. This world is qualitatively different than in the past. We are immersed in a technological change in how things are understood and communicated. Here's the second bridge. There are ways of thinking. There's a context in which problems exist. And this happy-looking fellow, Dave Snowden, formerly of IBM, has put that together. He created a framework. He's Welsh, so he used a Welsh word. He called it the Cynefin framework. It's a model. It's a model that you can look at, from which you can make certain assumptions and dispositions of what to do. He argued, when confronted with a problem, instead of saying, what should I do about it? You should say, in what kind of context is this problem? In what kind of context is the problem? And he argued that contexts are along a continuum. At the far end, let's say the right side, are contexts that are structured, organized, orderly, and predictable. And in those kinds of contexts are problems that are obvious and problems that are complicated. Complicated problems are those that at least are predictable, have structure. At the other end are problems that are unstructured, unorderly, unpredictable, in which the problems are complex and sometimes chaotic. And so when the context is evaluated, you then discern the nature of the problem within it. Now, it's not a boxy world, and so problems may possess characteristics of everything. And even as you're trying to address the problem, you're actually trying to move it from contexts and problem types that are much more challenging to those that are much more obvious. So the process of solving problems is to make the answer more obvious. And the problems themselves have parts that seem to be easy and parts that seem to be much more difficult. So again, not what's the problem, not what to do, but what kind of problem is it? In what kind of context? Is the problem more organized and complicated, or is it more disorganized, unorganized, confusing, and complex? Now, until recently, the words complicated and complex were overlapped. But after the Cynefin and the continuous application of it, these words have taken on very different meanings. And it's been recognized that there's a qualitative difference between a problem that is complicated and one that is complex. And therefore, the means of what to do about it are qualitatively different. And if you try to address a complicated problem using appropriate methodologies, you should find an outcome which solves it. But if you use the same methods on a complex problem, you cannot solve it. You must apply a complex methodology to a complex problem. And the final bridge. Different contexts produce different problems, which require different modes of thinking. Analysis, analytic thinking, its premises, methods, and tools are appropriate for complicated problems. But for complex problems, you must apply systems thinking. But here's the problem. If we're not being taught systems thinking in elementary and high school, if it's occasionally taught in college, how do you learn it? How do you get it into the heads of leaders? And number two, even if you take a class, even if you learn it, even if you're told what to do and how to apply it, how do you shift your thinking between analytic and systemic? By what method do you change your thinking? Is it as easy as saying, I'm going to think differently? But what's the process of trying to accomplish that? There is a long, broad, wide history of systems theories that have generated many systems methodologies, many systems tools. I was exposed to it 20 years only by the guy with the star next to his name. But had I attended a different university, had I been with different people, I possibly would have learned a different approach. It's all systems thinking. And there's more being developed on a regular basis. So how do you learn it? This is a great book, Systems Thinkers, by Ramage and Chip. They decided to bring together what they thought were the top 30 systems thinkers and their methodologies. They wrote in the preface, they would have put in another 10 or 15, but the publisher put a limit on the size of the book. Guy on the right, Mike Jackson, former dean of the University of Hull in the UK School of Business, wrote a couple of fabulous books. One is a deep dive into about a dozen systems, theories, methodologies, and tools, and commentary on each, comparing their utility. What can we do? Iacocca Institute. Well, there's a fundamental appreciation that we must all have, and that is the following. We may work in a system. I work in an education system. Some people work in a financial system. Others work in social systems. There's a lot of different kinds of systems. But this does not mean you think in systems. It means you think about systems. To think in systems, to be a systems thinker, is not a trivial task. You don't do it because you say you're going to do it. You must hold a clear set of premises and assumptions. You must have mental models that correspond to those premises and assumptions. You must apply certain methods when you examine a problem. You must formulate a problem in a particular way that adheres to systems thinking. You must intervene using techniques and applying certain tools that follow those assumptions. And you don't gain them in a single class. It's a discipline. It takes years to become an analytic thinker, and so it takes a long time to be a systems thinker. And to move between them also takes discipline and appropriate methods and tools to enable it. So, we must help others to seek where systems learning education is available. There are systems classes available online. There are lots of books, journals, magazines, and we need to bring this forward and promote how to look at problems and how to address them using these tools that are available. We must seek communities and find mentors. Mentorship is swell. That's how I learned it. I learned it with a mentor, and I continuously stay with mentors in order to help me acquire the methods that are necessary to think in systems. There are professional groups that have these. There are organizations within them that one can find and investigate. We must start to use systems in the application of problem solving. My job at Iacocca Institute is to be director of applied research. By this, I take very seriously using systems methods when I'm dealing with complex multi-system problems. That's not analytic thinking. It's systemic thinking, which has analytic thinking inside it, but it's not only thinking in analytic ways. Framing it at your own workplace is important. Look at a problem and reframe it in systems terms. There was a classic story at Vanguard in which one of the vice presidents took a course in systems thinking from a colleague of mine and was talking to the CEO and started reframing a problem they were dealing with, large financial issues, and filled the blackboard with all of these different looking terms and images. And the CEO took out his phone and started taking pictures. He says, I've never seen anything like this before. We've got to build this into the fabric of Vanguard. Scott and I have talked about games, systems thinking, serious games, in which you can learn systems by playing interactively with others. We need to think more about how we think. We need to promote more people going out and trying to learn themselves and practice themselves until we have many more resources available. It involves learning how to shift your framework, how to adopt new mental models, how to shift your mindset, what to do about your worldview, all of which can incorporate systems thinking. And I think I'm done. Ta-da!
Larry, well done.